two medieval chroniclers told a very similar and slightly bizarre tale. Ralph, abbot at Coggeshall in Essex, and William of Newburgh, canon at a priory in Yorkshire, both wrote about a Suffolk village called Woolpit that was visited by two children who couldn't speak English. The children were green. Even though the younger one died, his sister survived, lost her strange colour, married and lived a long life. We've seen the village of Woolpit where they arrived. We've seen the church at Bardwell where they were likely taken to see the local nobleman, Richard de Calne. We've looked at the timeline and narrowed the children's arrival down to around 1153 or 4. The story of the Green Children has often been associated with fairies, but before we get to that bit, there's one more thing that's been bothering me. In Ralph of Coggeshall's version, the children emerged into this world through a cave. The children's description of their own homeland sounds a bit odd. It sounds as though they were unused to seeing direct sunlight.
Our land is scarcely illuminated by its rays. It gets only the amount of light that among you precedes sunrise or follows sunset.
They saw no sun, but experienced a sort of light like that occurs at twilight. When they were following the cattle, they had come into a certain cavern. When they entered it, they had heard the beautiful sound of bells. Captivated by the sweetness of the sound, they had gone on wandering through the cavern for a very long time, until they reached a way out of it.
The thing is, Suffolk is flat. There aren't any caves. But caves have another significance. Both fairyland and the land of the dead have often been portrayed as beneath our feet, and this was a particularly popular theme in the 12th century. Walter Map told the story of the ancient King Hurler, who went with his retinue to attend a wedding. They got to their destination by passing through a cave in a cliff till they came to a strangely lit land, seemingly not of sun or of moon, but of many lamps. As he left, he was given the gift of a small bloodhound, which, his host warned, was to be carried, and neither Hurler nor his men were to dismount until the dog had jumped onto the ground.
Some of his fellows, heedless of the warnings, dismounted before the descent of the dog and were immediately changed to dust. But the king, understanding the reason for this change, prohibited by threat of death anyone to touch the earth before the descent of the dog. But the dog never descended.
Gerald of Wales told the story of a boy named Elodere, who was led by a couple of small people through underground passages to a land that was beautiful but not lit by the full light of the sun. He visited the land and its people often until his mother encouraged him to steal a souvenir. He managed to take a golden ball, but the people retrieved it from him before he got home.
When he came to where the underground passage had been, there was no entry to be found. For nearly a year he searched the overhanging banks of the river, but could never find the tunnel again.
Gervase of Tilbury told of how a pig herder looked for a lost sow in a cave. He travelled through it and found himself in a new country. Even though it was winter time where he had come from, in this other world, it was harvest.
I love dark folklore, and I'm guessing because you're here that you do too. Let's stay in touch. All of my socials are listed below. And remember, if you want to help the channel, then like, share and subscribe. Enjoy. So, is there a connection between this popular theme and our Green Children? I went to see a man who quite literally wrote the book.
Well, I think I was aware of the Green Children for a long time, probably from one Catherine Briggs's books of folk tales and legends. But it was something in, not Fortean Times, but Fortean Studies, which was an offshoot of that magazine, edited by Stephen Moore, which had longer, more, shall we say, academic articles about the paranormal and tales of wonder and things like that. And an article by Paul Harris appeared in 1998 about the Green Children, proposing, shall we say, a down-to-earth explanation. And I was not entirely convinced, so I wrote a follow-up article from the point of view of somebody who was interested in medieval history, could read a bit of medieval Latin, which helped, and I called it a cautionary tale.
What about that pig herder who went through a cave to a different land?
It's pretty clear that, in my mind, that Rafe Coggeshall knew that story. He was a friend of Gervase of Tilbury, who actually relates the story. Gervase says he got the story from local people up in the Peak District in the days of Peveril and whatnot, which is early 12th century. It's supposed to happen a very long time ago. William says, indeed, that they were herding their father's cattle one day, and then something happened. They don't know what. They suddenly found themselves out, as if they'd driven out of their minds, suddenly found themselves in the fields around Woolpit, where the harvesters found them. Rafe, on the other hand, goes in this long story about they followed the cattle into a cave, got lost, wandered through the cave for a long time, heard the sounds of bells enticing them on, followed the sounds of the bells, and came out in a pit on the edge of the fields of Woolpit, and that's where the harvesters found them, which is a folk tale. It's a sort of mirror image of several folk tales about people following animals into a cave and coming out in a different world in fairyland. So I think Rafe probably knew that story, and he takes it as the basis for his own elaboration. Because he clearly did believe that these kids did come from another world somewhere, a fairyland of some sort. So I think over the years he has, both in his own mind to improve the story, has added in bits and pieces that he's picked up from elsewhere, whereas William does not do that. William is a more, shall we say, accurate historian in the modern sense. I don't think Rafe necessarily followed that pattern of being sort of investigating things.
So we're starting to detect some differences in approach between Ralph and William.
Once or twice they do record the same event in not so much similar words, but the events follow a sort of pattern. And when I put the two stories together, side by side in a little table, to see what happened, I realised that, well, there are two aspects to the story of the Green Children. It's what people said or reported, things that had really happened, and what the children said, or what the girl said when she learned to speak English, could explain where they came from. And what was interesting was to find that Rafe and William had different approaches to what the children said, totally different stories, but when you looked at what the eyewitnesses are supposed to have reported, point by point they run in parallel, which suggested that yes, they might have had different sources, but the main source was the same for the events, the recorded events, res gestae, things that happened. As historians, that's what they wanted. It was a true tale.
So we found out that the theme of visitors from an underground world isn't that uncommon, especially for that era. And we've started to tease out the differences between our two chroniclers. William feels that he's reporting history, even as odd as it sounds, and Ralph is more comfortable with the mythic or symbolic elements. But we still have another question. Why were the children green? Come back soon for episode 4.